Today's shiur begins at the top of Daf Ayin Daled, at the Mishnah. Before we begin the actual text, we glance at the side. We have a topic heading, which reads, Gimel Deos Tanoim, 3 Tanaic opinions, Binyan Haforas Neder al Yedei Yavam, regarding the ability of a Yavam to annul the vows of a Yavama. The Mishnah. Shemeres Yavam, Bain Liyavam Echod Bain Lishne Yivmin. A woman whose husband died, leaving no children, but he has a surviving brother. The Mishnah makes reference to a possibility of having 2 surviving brothers. They are the Yivmin. One of them, of course, is expected to marry her in order to promote the name of the deceased. Rabbi Ozer Omer Yofer. Rabbi Ozer says that vow annulment on the part of the Yavam is a possibility, even if you're talking about a case where there are 2 Yivmin. Rashi tells us that in the Gemara we will be told that the Yavam that will do the annulment is a Yavam who had given her money. That's called Kiddushay Maimer. And those who have learned Maseches Yevomis will be familiar with that concept of Maimer, which establishes a type of, say, rabbinic link or rabbinic connection between the Yavam and the Yavama. When we speak about a connection, it means it's a connection beyond the basic Zika link that exists as a result of his being a Yavam. So Rebbe Ozer says that Hafora is a possibility, is a reality in the case of a Shemeres Yavam, even if there happen to be more than one surviving brother. Rabbi Yeshua Omer le'echad avoloi l'shnayim. A Shemeres Yavam, her vows can be annulled if there is one Yavam, not if there are 2 Yivmin. Rabbi Akiva Omer loi le'echad v'loi l'shnayim. Rabbi Akiva says there is no annulment done by a Yavam, not if there are 2, and not even if there is 1. Omar Rebbe Ozer. Now, Rebbe Ozer was of the opinion that a Yavam has the power to annul the Yavama's vows. Rebbe Ozer explains, Ma im isha shekonahu li'atzmo harehu mefer nedara. Mind you, a woman that is married by the man on his own volition, the man has the power to annul her vows. Isha shehiknu lo min hashamayim eino din shiofer nedara. A woman who is connected, is given to a man by heaven. In other words, the Yavama and her connection to the Yavam is through the death of her husband. That's an act of heaven, so that she has been given to the Yavam through heavenly intervention. All the more so, he should have the powers to annul her vows. Omar lo Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva disagrees, and he says not so, that I'm not going to accept your logic as the basis of such a conclusion. Im amris be'isha shekonahu li'atzmo she'ein la'acherim bo reshus. If you're going to cite the case of a woman that a man on his own sought out in marriage, that is because others, after a man marries a woman, no one else has any marriage possibility with her. Tomar be'isha shehiknu lo min hashamayim sheyesh la'acherim bo reshus. Should you be able to say the same thing, the same power in the case of a yibum situation? That's isha shehiknu lo min hashamayim, where if she is, let us say, bound to one Yavam, she's equally bound on a total level to all of the brothers. Rashi goes a little further and says on the 3rd narrow line, says sheyesh li'acher reshus bo shim also bo maimer yavam zeh. If one of the surviving brothers offered her money in anticipation of his doing the yibum with her, and the other brother comes along, the also bal maimer, and also offers her money for her marriage to him in yibum, tafis ba, that takes hold, kidomar yesh maimer achar maimer, so that you can see there's a certain weakness to a yibum relationship that you don't find in a regular self-initiated marriage relationship. That's what Rabbi Akiva's point is, that you cannot make a kavachomer from the case of a regular marriage and extend the annulment rights to the case of Yibum. Amar le Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua now enters the discussion, and he says to Rabbi Akiva, he says, Akiva, devarecha b'shnei yivmin, your argument is valid in showing the weakness of Yibum only in the case of two Yivmin. In other words, how did Rabbi Akiva demonstrate the weakness? By saying that just like one Yavam who, as according to Rashi, offers her maimer, the money in exchange for her agreeing to marry him, the second brother could also do so, and it takes effect, and she won't be able to marry the first husband as a result of that. These are technical points that are elaborated upon in Maseches Yevomis, but Rabbi Akiva's point on demonstrating the weakness of Yibum is understood only when you have two Yivmin. Ma'ata meishiv al Yavam echad. What are you, Rabbi Akiva, going to say in response to Rabbi Eliezer if there's only one Yavam? Omar loi. So Rabbi Akiva answers, Ein hayavoma gemura leisha keshem sheharusa gemura leisha. That's a rather abstract sounding statement, but we can take a look at the Rashi. Omar le ein hayavoma gemura leisha sheim ba aleha zar. If an outsider were to have intimacy with the yavoma, mind you, she's waiting for the surviving brother, in other words, her brother-in-law, to marry her. If an outsider would come along and engage in intimacy with her during this interim period, he would not be punishable by capital punishment, by stoning. She'ein ba lo din arusa v'lo din eishasi. She's not considered an arusa, which would result in stoning if she behaves immorally, nor is she considered a fully married woman either, which would ordinarily result in a punishment of chenek. V'ein chayovim ela lav delosia eishes hames hachutza le'izar. Her offense is categorized as a mere violation of a negative command based on the pasuk that Rashi just cited. That's in the case of a yavoma acting immorally. However, if a regular marriage, a woman, an arusa, behaves immorally with another man, there the penalty is stoning. So you cannot compare whatever we say with regard to yavoma to the case of a regular woman. So that in the case of a regular woman, there we see that the connection is very intense, so much so that an outsider that would have immorality, would conduct intimacy with her, would be punishable by stoning. Not so in the case of a yavam, even if it's a singular yavam that's waiting for her. If an outsider can have intimacy with her during that period, it would be considered a lav, a violation of a mere negative command, not carrying with it a death penalty. So that the fact that a husband can annul vows does not enable me to conclude the same for a yavam to be able to annul vows. The Gemara now continues with the analysis of the Tanoim. Bishlama Rabbi Akiva. I understand Rabbi Akiva that says that a yavam under any circumstance, a yavam cannot annul the vows of the yavama. Savar ein zika. Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that there is no tangible connection. Zika means a link or a connection between the two. It's true there's a mitzvah to be performed, but there is no link to enable us to consider her like his wife until they actually consummate the marriage. So that's Rabbi Akiva's approach, and as a result, the Yavam is like an outsider, and he cannot annul her vows. Rabbi Yehoshua, he says, Savar Yesh Zika. And as a result of that, if there is one Yavam, he is able to annul her vows. We look at Rashi, Rabbi Yehoshua Savar Yesh Zika, Ulahachi Le'echad Yafer. Therefore, if there's one Yavam, since there is this bond, the Zika bond, he is like a husband and can annul her vows. L'shnayim eino mefer. If she is a shemeres Yavam, she's a Yavama waiting for one of two brothers to marry her. There's no hafara. De'ein breira le'ezemen zukuka le'ezemen tisyabim. There, Rabbi Yeshua denies the power or the effectiveness of breira, retroactive determination, to establish to whom she is bound, who is the Yavam. So Rabbi Yeshua's position is also clearly understood. Ella Rabbi Ozer, but Rabbi Ozer in the Mishnah, my ta'ameh, what is the explanation to justify hafara even in the case where there are two yivmin? Yesh zika ein breira. Even if you say that there is a bond between a yavam and yavama, but nevertheless there is no breira, you can't establish who the yavam is. So how in the world is a yavam going to annul her vows when we're not sure that this is the one that's really going to be marrying her? In order to explain Rabbi Ozer in the Mishnah, you see we have diamonds, and they introduce, and they're introduced on the side of the Gemara under the Nosei Mivneh heading, the topic heading with the structural note. These are Shtei Deos Lahas B'Shitas Rabbi Ozer, two opinions in order to explain Rabbi Ozer Domar Degam B'Shnei Yivmin Shayach Hafara. And even in the presence of two surviving brothers, in other words, there are two brothers-in-law that are, one of whom is waiting to do Yibum with her, we don't know which one it is, how do we explain the possibility of Hafara? So, as we recommend all the time, just a bird's eye view. Do you see Rabbi Ami in a diamond? That's number one. And then there's a second approach, 3 lines from the bottom. The Gemara continues. Omar Rabbi Ami, Kegoin she'asa ba maimer. In the situation of two Yivmin, one of them gave her money. And now with the money being presented by the Yavam to the Yavam, which by the way is a rabbinic idea. In a regular marriage, in order to establish marriage, so a strange man approaches a strange woman, and after they, let's say, get to know each other a little bit, he gives her money or something of value. In exchange, she agrees to marry him. That is a deoraisa. That works on a Torah level. That creates a bond. There was no bond to begin with in that case. But in the case of Yibum, there is a connection that's established with the death of the husband. So that the relationship between the widow and the brother-in-law is a relationship that exists without the need for money on a Torah level. What happens if the Yavam gives her money? So on a rabbinic level, that we'll say that enhances their connection, but on a rabbinic level. So that if one of the Yivmin, one of the surviving brothers, gave her money, we can now employ the breira idea. Even though the line before we said ein breira, in the case of money being given, we can say, oh, now we understand who the Yavam is, and who the we'll call the singular Yavam is, even though they're really two Yivmin. And hence, he's been isolated or highlighted, and hence he has the power to do Hafara. This is Reb Ami's explanation of Reb Ozer in the Mishnah. So that Reb Ozer was speaking specifically about a case where Maimer, the money offer, was made to the Yavama. So, with that in mind, the Gemara continues, Rabbi Ozer, Sovar lo kebei Shammai. Rabbi Ami is explaining that the Tana, Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah, adopts Beis Shammai's approach to Maimer di Amri. Beis Shammai holds Maimer Kina Kinyan Gomor. Maimer is a full-fledged form of acquisition. This is an idea that is unique to Beis Shammai, and the Rosh goes all the way with this and says in the middle of the wide lines, Beis Shammai Damri Maimer Kinyan Gomer. We're reading in the Rosh. It says Kinyan Gomer min ha-Torah. It works on a Torah level. This is a chiddush. In other words, this is not like we said before, but now we're explaining things through the eyes of Beis Shammai, that the Maimer idea works on a Torah level, the Dorish v'lochalo leisha, ayidei lekicha nasis ishta, that through lekicha is a reference to the offering of money on the part of a yavam to the yavama, she becomes like his wife on a Torah level. The Gemara continues, V'Rebbe Yeshua Omar Loch, Hani Mili B'Chad Yavam. Rabbi Yeshua holds that there is a bond between the Yavam and the Yavama, but that's only when there's one Yavam. Aval B'Shnei Yivim, if there are two surviving brothers, two brothers-in-law, Loi Mi'ika Midi, he explains that when you have two, then we don't say that there is a bond which would enable Hafara. Mi'ika Midi, is there anything? Dechi Osi Achva Osur Alei Babia O Begita U Mefer? Could there possibly be a situation where the second brother could come along and break the bond, so to speak, prevent the first brother-in-law from marrying her, and think that in the meantime the first brother-in-law would be able to be mefer? Let's explain that a little further by looking at the Rosh commentary. Rabbi Yeshua Sovar Hani Mili B'Chad Acha. Rabbi Yeshua Lo Sovar Ke Beis Shammai. Rabbi Yeshua does not hold like Beis Shammai, that the Maimer would establish a full-fledged husband-wife level relationship. Hilkoch B'Chad Acha Mefer. Therefore, if there's one Yavam, he can annul the vow Mishum Zika because of the Zika bond, the Chashiva Kiknusa, the fact that there is one clear Yavam, that makes it as if she is already married to him. That's the power of saying Yesh Zika. Aval betray, when you have two brothers-in-law, Ein Zika, V'afilu Asaba Maimer. And this is the main point that Rabbi Yeshua is making, that when you have two Yivmin, there is no Zika, even if one of them gave her money. Why is that so? Since the second brother, the one who did not do the Maimer, if he were, let us say, give the Yavama a divorce document, a get, or he were to engage in intimacy with her, that first brother-in-law that gave her money would not be allowed to marry her, to do the Yibum. So as we saw in the Gemara, how could it be that a man who, even if he gave her money, but his bond to her is subject to reversal, to dissolution, how could it be that such a man could have the power to annul her vows? And that scenario is so when you have two Yivmin, two brothers-in-law. We continue in the Gemara of Rabbi Kiva Savar, Ein Zika. Rabbi Kiva says there is no bond. There is a mitzvah to do Yibum, but there's no bond that establishes the Yavam Yavama to be like husband and wife. And therefore, even in the case of one Yavam, he cannot annul her vows. The Gemara asks, Ula Rebbe Lazar. This is another opinion. So sometimes the issue of names could be confusing. This is not a reference to the Tana Rebbe Eliezer in our Mishnah, but this is an Amora, whose name is Rabbi Ozer ben Pedas. And so the Gemara now asks, Rabbi Ozer, the Omar, Maimer leBei Shammai ein koine ela lidchos b'tzara. Rabbi Ozer ben Pedas, this Amora interprets Beis Shammai with regard to Maimer, not like we saw Rav Ami explain, but rather it doesn't create a full-fledged husband-wife relationship. All that Maimer does is that it's doiche b'tzara, ela lidchos b'tzara. My ika lemeimar. According to Rabbi Lozer's approach to Beis Shammai, that the Maimer doesn't establish, as we said, a full-fledged husband-wife relationship, why then does the Tana, Rabbi Lezer, in the Mishnah say that even in the case of Shnei Yivmin, where there are two surviving brothers, Hafara is a possibility? The Gemara will answer that with diamond number 2. Before we go further, though, we look in the Rosh commentary to appreciate a little more what does Rabbi Ozer mean when he says, according to Beis Shammai, Maimer is only Deiche B'tzara. So we take a look in the Rosh commentary. You'll notice the more than halfway down the wide lines of the Rosh, he says, Rabbi Ozer Diomar Maimer leBeis Shammai koine l'chus b'tzara gabi hod desnan beperek arba achin, regarding that which is taught in that perek of Yevomas that's called the Arba Achin. What is the story at hand? Shlosh Achim, there are 3 brothers, and by the way, by all means, use the chart that we've included at the bottom of the page to follow along. So you have 3 brothers, and on the chart you can see they're called Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi, abbreviated with singular letters. There are 3 brothers, Shnayim Mem Nesum Shtei Achoyos, 2 of them, Ruvain and Shimon, you can see on the chart, are married to Rachel and Leah respectively. V'echad Mufne, and there's a 3rd unmarried brother, namely Levi. Meis echad mibale achoyos, one of the 2 brothers married to the 2 sisters died, and on our diagram you can see a number 1 indicating the death of, and the slash through the resh, indicating the death of that brother Ruvain. He died. V'osa bo mufne maimer, and stage 2, you can see Levi gives Rachel money. That's Kiddushay Maimer. V'achar kach meis ochiv hasheni, and then Shimon dies. That's stage 3. Now, is there a bond between Levi and Rachel? Well, there's a bond, a Maimer bond, or a connection that was established through the Maimer. And as a result of that connection, Beis Shammai Omrim Ishto Imo, that Levi can remain with Rachel, and the Halazu Teitze Mishum Achos Isha, and Leah is exempt from Yibum. She's not a candidate for Yibum because she is in effect the sister of Rachel, who is like Levi's wife, not full-fledged wife, and that's the main point right now, but like Levi, Rachel is like Levi's wife, so that Leah is viewed as the sister of Levi's wife, and a man cannot marry 2 sisters, and therefore there's exemption from Yibum with regard to Leah. The Kamar Belozar, that which Beis Shammai says that Maimer has an acquisition power on a Torah level, Hainudafka, Lichos Hatzara, Eishis Achiv, Shenafalev, and Asis Lotzara Benafilazu. That it works on a Torah level to exclude Leah from Yibum. We might point out that if Levi had not done Maimer with Rachel, but simply remained a totally single brother, Ruvain died, and then Shimon died, you have 2 sisters that are, we'll say, confronting Levi, and Levi would not be able to do Yibum with either one, because either woman is Achoy Sekukaso, is the sister of a woman who is connected to him through the Yibum bond. So that the fact that Levi did Maimer with Rachel is we'll say a chiddush, that Levi can stay with Rachel and is not threatened by the achos zekuka issue that would have been a threat, as we said, had Maimer not been done. So you see that Maimer has a power, a Torah level power to disqualify Leah in our case from Yibum. The Rosh goes on though, Avol I boy lafuka begita lo motzi. If Levi, after doing Maimer with Rachel, thinks to get rid of her, to divorce her with a mere divorce document that you would give to a regular wife, that's not so over here. The chalitza namibaya, chalitza is still necessary. The hani hachtrosh perakam the kiddushin, with regard to why this is so the Rosh cites a Gemara in Kiddushin, which we don't have to get into right now. So, as we saw in the Gemara, according to the Amora Rebbe Ozer, who understands that the power of Maimer with regard to Beis Shammai has limited effect, so then how do we explain the Tana Rebbe Eliezer, who said that even when there are two Yivmin, the hafara is a possibility? So the Gemara answers: Hocha b'mayaskinan, kegoyin de shamad bedin v'schayav lo mezonos. The court intervened, and Maimer was done. Okay, that you can see that point in Rashi. The Rosh on that detail has a different take on it, but to keep things simple, one of the brothers did do Maimer, which we already established doesn't really create a husband-wife bond. However, it's enough that the court, Kigon Shalman Bedin, as we saw in the Gemara, the court got involved and said, we expect you to do Yibum. You can't leave her hanging for so long. And they said that you now have to start supporting her. And as a result of this Yavam, one of the two that the court identified, isolated, and demanded him to start supporting her, the vows that she takes, that the Yavama takes, are based on the Yavam's approval, based on Reb Pinchas's teaching. And we take a look at in the Rashi, Kigon Shoman Bedin, Rashi says, Misha'asa Ba Maimer, Shazu Tavase Bedin, Mipnei Shalohoya Miyabmo. He had done Maimer, one of the two surviving brothers gave her money, and she sought him out, let's go all the way and consummate our Yibum marriage. And he was tarrying, and as Rashi says, she placed a claim against him in the court because he wasn't going ahead. The Chayvu Bezdin Linosei law, and Bezdin imposed an obligation on him to now consummate the marriage. Uborach, and he ran away. The Chayav Lobim is Yisrael, the Dorech of Pinchas, and well, with that he is bound to support her, and he thereby is able to annul her vows. And that's, as Rav Pinchas teaches, we read in the Gemara, Rav Pinchas Mishmei the Rav Diomar, Kol HaNoderes, women who vow Aldas Bailo I Noderes. She vows assuming the approval of her husband. When we speak about of her husband, and we're referring to, in this case, of the one who is supporting her. So with all of that information in place, we can understand that even if there are two Yivmin, the Tana, Rebbe Eliezer can say that the one that was obligated by the court to support her, he is the one, the Yavam, that has the ability to annul her vows. We continue at the top of Omid Beis. You'll notice we have a long question marking, and the question here is focused on Rebbe Ami's explanation. This approach, you can see, is taken by the Rosh in a very explicit fashion, that this is a question on Rebbe Ami. Rebbe Ami had established the Tana Rebbe Eliezer as empowering the Yavam that did Maimer with her to annul her vows. So now we continue in the Gemara. Tanan, Omer Rabbi Eliezer. This is, of course, a quote from the Mishnah, and we're dealing with the Tana Rabbi Eliezer that Rabbi Ami was coming to explain. What does it say in the Mishnah? Uma im isha shikona le'atzma reu mefer nedareha. If a man marries a woman on his own volition, he gains the power of annulling her vows. Isha shehikno lo min hashamayim. A woman that was granted to him through heaven. Eino din shemefer nedarel. All the more so he has the power to annul her vows. If Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah is speaking as Rabbi Ami claimed, that he had taken the initiative of giving her money, then he acquired her. The Mishnah describes Rabbi Eliezer as referring to a woman that was granted him by heaven. But if Rabbi Ami's explanation is so, that the Mishnah, namely Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah, is speaking about a case where Maimer was done, so why do you say Hikdalo min hashamayim, that's heavenly granted to him, or heavenly entitled to him? He did it. He gave her money. The Gemara answers, that's not a question. Shekona li'atzmoi al yedei shamayim. It's true he gave her money, but who was he giving? Who was he, the Yavam, giving money to? He was giving money to a woman that came to him through heavenly intervention, through the death of her husband. So that the term of Hikna Lo Min Shamayim does not contradict the explanation of Rab Ami. Now you notice we have a bracketed section. One could debate the need or the validity of having brackets here, but what we are trying to accomplish is, if you skip the bracketed section, you see immediately the Gemara says Tanya Nami Hochi Ki Rabbi Ami. We now are going to bring support. It's a very long point. This long point takes us to the top of Ayin Hey Amen Aleph. One very long point where we present a Tanaic source which serves as a support for Rav Ami, so that in the give and take of the Gemara, we raised the question at the top line on Rav Ami, we answered the question of Rav Ami, and then we bring support to Rav Ami. Now, we have a bracketed section. Within the bracketed section, it's true the Gemara deals with the issue of Maimer, but we can view that which is in the bracketed section as a separate point. With all of that having been said, let's go now straight through the Gemara without skipping. What I wanted to show is that simply after the brackets, having answered the question of Rav Ami, we then have a support to Rav Ami, which is very nice. Now, in the brackets, we continue. Tifshot de boy Rabba. When you see this Gemara structure, Tifshot de boy so and so, basically it's a question which says, with what we've learned, can we now resolve a question that was posed by so and so? In this case, Rabba had posed a question once upon a time, and with the information we've learned, we should be able to answer his question. What's hinted to in a Gemara like this is that, but after all, Rabba, in this case, Rabba had the question, so didn't he know everything that we've said till this point, and still he had the question? So it must be that we can't resolve his question based on what we've learned. So we have, as far as our markings are concerned, we're starting this we're not describing it, even though it's an intimated question. We're calling this a point, and then the Gemara is going to say at the end of this long point, no, you can't conclude that which we are suggesting. So now let's see this in the Gemara. Tifshot de boy Rabba. Let us conclude, offer an answer to Rabba's question. What does Rabba ask? Maimer lebei Shammai. Eirusin oy nesuin. Maimer according to Beis Shammai, does it accomplish Eirusin Erusin is the first stage of marriage between a, let's say, regular husband and wife situation? Or does it establish Nisuin? Of course, Maimer is in the context of Yibum. But what level of connection is achieved by Maimer, according to Beis Shammai, if you were to compare the Yavama after Maimer to a case of a regular marriage? Does it create Erusin status or Nisuin status? So, in light of what we've learned till now, Tifsho, let us conclude the Nisuin Isa, that it accomplishes the Nisuin level, the high level, the level of consummation. D'i Erusin Isa, if Maimer simply brought them to the Erusin level, Ha'tnan, but we've learned earlier, Naira Murasa Avia Ubaila Mafira Nedara. There's no annulment of vows in the case of a Rusa, Naira Murasa, unless the father is also involved. Yet, we saw, in our current discussion, we saw that Rabbi Eliezer said that even if you have multiple Yivmin, once Maimer is done, as Rabbi Ami explained, once Maimer is done, that one Yavam who did the Maimer is able to annul the vows. There's no reference to a father working along with him, so it must be that the Maimer creates a type of Nisuin status. Had it been an Erusin status, then the Yavam wouldn't have been able to function on his own as we've been assuming. The Gemara says, no, you can't reach any conclusions regarding Rabba's question, because as far as our Yavam is concerned, Omar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Ma Yofer, what is meant by Yofer in our Mishnah with Rebbe Ozer saying that the Yavam can be Mefer? It's Yofer b'shutfis. It's Hafara, but together with the father. And if that be the case, so then it could be that all that Maimer accomplishes is Erusin. So Rabba is left with his question. The statement or the position of Rebbe Ozer in the Mishnah cannot be used to resolve his question. Tanya Nami Hachi Kerebi Ami. At this point, the Gemara cites a Tanaic source that will to support Rav Ami, that the Machloikis Tanoim in the Mishnah, and focusing on Rebbe Ozer momentarily, is a case where the Yavam did Maimer. There were two Yivmin, and one of them did Maimer with the Yavama. As far as how are we going to see a support in this source, you're going to have to wait till the Gemara at the top of Ayin Hey, which elaborates on information in this source. On the side of the Gemara, you can see we have a nosei, a topic heading we call Hemshech, simply a continuation of the topic. Siumi Braisa, a support from a Tanaic source, Lehesberish Reb Ami B'divrei Rebbe Ozer, to support Reb Ami, who was an Amora. Reb Ami's explanation of the Tana Rebbe Ozer, the Ben Yavam Echad Ben Shnei Yivmin the Yavam Mefer, Shemeduber B'Shasa Ba Maimer. In the Mishnah, we're talking about a case where one of those two surviving brothers had done Maimer with their sister-in-law. And we know Heora Ech Roim Hasiyah Muzbar B'Ayin Hayamanav. How to see the support will be explained on Ayin Hayamad Aleph. So now we have a Gemara, and note again, like we mentioned earlier, it's a long point, and it takes you till the fifth line from the top of Ayin Hayamad Aleph. So we continue now with the Tanaic source. Shemeres Yavam Bein Yavam Echad Bein Shnei Yivmin. A Shemeres Yavam, even if she is an Almona with two of her husband's surviving brothers present, Rebbe Ozer Omer Yofer. Rebbe Ozer's Hafara is a possibility. One of those Yivmin will have the power to be Mefer. Rabbi Yeshua Omer Le'echad V'lo L'shnayim. A Yavam can be Mefer only if he is a singular, a sole brother, and not one of two or more brothers. Rabbi Akiva Omer Lo Le'echad V'lo L'shnayim. Rabbi Akiva says there is no hafara on the part of a yavam, not only if there are two brothers, but even if there's one surviving brother, nevertheless he has no hafara power. Amar Rabbi Ozer, who was very much in favor of Yavam doing hafara, having the power to do hafara, explains, Uma im isha she'ein lo chelek bo'ad shelo tova l'rishuso. Misha basa l'rishuso nigmar lo. Mind you, a woman in a regular marriage situation, that he has no connection with her before she comes into his domain. When she comes into his domain, for example, the Orus is Mefer, the Nedarim, with her father. So we see that a husband who previously had no connection with her, once she enters the domain of marriage, the realm of marriage, he does have the power to annul her vows. Isha sheyesh lo chelek ad shelo tava l'rishuso. In the case of a Yavama, this is a woman that the Yavam had a connection with her before she enters his domain. Namely, before he does anything, she is connected to him. She's zekuka to him. So misha baso l'rishuso eno din shetigmor lo. When she comes into his domain, and we'll have to explain that later. That's the point the Gemara will make on Daf Ayin Haman Aleph, that this expression misha baso l'rishuso is in fact a reference to the mimer. That's a point of support to Rav Ami's explanation of Rabbi Eliezer. Don't forget, we're speaking right now within Rabbi Eliezer. So that this expression, Misha Basa l'Rishuso, Eino Din Shetigmor Lo, and when she enters his domain, the Yavama enters the realm, the domain of the Yavam, all the more so, he has the power to mefer her Nedarim. Omar Lo, Rabbi Akiva Lo. Rabbi Akiva disagrees. Imamris Beisha Shikona Huli Atzmo, if you're saying that a woman who was acquired by a man on his own, Shekashem She'ein Lo Chelek Ba, Kachein Lacherim Chelek Ba. Just like he has no connection with her before Erison, so too no others have any connection with her before Erison. Toimar Beisha Shehiknu Lo Min HaShamayim. Should you say the same thing with regard to a Yavama, a woman who was granted to him by heaven, Shekashem Sheyesh Lo Imo Chelek, just like he has a connection with her, Kach Yesh Lacherim Chelek Ba, so to other Yivmin, other brothers, surviving brothers of the deceased have a connection with her. Omar Lo Rabbi Yoshua Akiva Dvorecha B'Shnei Yivmin, your point in demonstrating we'll say the weakness of a Yavam is only in the case where there are a couple of them, a couple of surviving brothers. Mata Meishiv al Yavam Echad. What are you going to answer in terms of, or concerning a situation of one Yavam? Omar Lo. So Rabbi Akiva responds, Klum Chilaknu al Yavam Echad val Shnei Yivmin. Do you think that we really make a distinction between one Yavam and two Yivmin? Bein shosabo maimer, bein shalosabo maimer. Whether maimer was done or maimer was not done, in all cases of Yibum, her status is not like the status of a Na'ara Hamurasa, to be Mechayev, one who has intimacy with her, with a Yavama, as would be the case of a Na'ara Hamurasa. Ukishar Dvorim Kain Nedarim. And just like regarding other matters, like the matter of capital punishment for immorality, the Yavama does not have the status of a Na'ara Hamurasa, so too with regard to Nedarim, the Yavama does not have the status of a Na'ara Hamurasa. Namely, in the case of Na'ara Hamurasa, there is hafara as a possibility on the part of a husband. In the case of Yibum, there is no hafara possibility on the part of the Yavam. But Lashon Hazeh Omar Ben Azai, using the following expression, Ben Azai said, Chaval alecha Ben Azai, woe unto you, Ben Azai shelo shimashtes Rabbi Akiva, that you didn't learn enough from Rabbi Akiva to know how to give such sharp answers and responses as Rabbi Akiva. I'm sure some of you, if not many of you, sense that we were explaining a lot more into the words than the literal translation of the text would have suggested. So of course, everything we said is based on the Meforshim that you see on the Daf. And how did the Meforshim come to their conclusions? By, of course, learning on in the Gemara. The Gemara asks, we continue at the top of Ayin Hamad Aleph, Tanyo Kavosei de Rabbi Ami. Where in this source do you see that Rabbi Ami's explanation of Rabbi Ozer finds support? What was Rabbi Ami's explanation of Rabbi Ozer? Rabbi Ozer, who says that even in the case of multiple Yivmin, Hafar is a possibility, it's because one of the Yivmin did Maimer. And as a result of the Maimer, so that Yavam has Hafara powers. Do you see that in the words of Rabbi Ozer in this text? So Gemara says, yeah, you'll see it, but we have to read on. Point number 1. Midikotani, from the fact that in this source it said, Bein sha'asa ba maimer. Bein shalo asa ba maimer. If you want to navigate with the markings, so you see that we have on the right-hand side of the text a mark indicating to look back at Ayin Dalet Amud Beis. So if you go back to Ayin Dalet Amud Beis, you find the corresponding mark 3 lines up from the bottom. You see a similar mark indicating Ayin Hamad Aleph. So it's at that point that this quote was mentioned. What was going on there? Rabbi Akiva was responding to Rabbi Yoshua, who was clarifying the circumstances of this source involving Yivmin. And what did Rabbi Akiva say? He said, listen, when you're dealing with Yivmin, whether Maimer was done or whether Maimer wasn't done. So you can see that it must be that Rabbi Akiva had heard that Rabbi Eliezer had explained the Yavam's ability to be Mefer because Maimer was done. Well, that's exactly what Rabbi Ami said. You can see Rashi on the second line from the top. Midikotoni, Rabbi Akiva Omer Klum Chilatnu Ben Yavam V'chulei Ben Sha'asa Maimer V'chulei. Rabbi Akiva says, do you think we make any distinctions in the case of Yibum, etc., and so forth? And he says, whether Maimer was done or not, Mechlal Dishami Leila Rabbi Ozer, it must be that Rabbi Akiva heard Rabbi Ozer taking the position, the Amar Kishosaba Maimer Yofer, that if the Yavam had done Maimer, had offered her money, so then he gets the powers of Hafara. And because of that, Rabbi Akiva responded the way he did. What's important for us is that through Rabbi Akiva's argument back to those that argue with him, including Rabbi Ozer, Rabbi Ozer had said that the Yavam's ability to do Hafara, even in the case of multiple Yavim, is because that one had given her money, had done Maimer. That's what Rabbi Ami had said as explaining Rabbi Eliezer. We continue in the Gemara. Inami me reisha dikotani. Now here, in order to find where this quote is coming from, we also have a cross-reference marking. To the left-hand side of the Gemara text, you see a mark indicating Ayin Dalet Amud Beis. So look back to Ayin Dalet Amud Beis for the same cross-reference marking, and you see Ayin Hey Amud Aleph. So it's explained from the, as the Gemara says, Inami me reisha. Alternatively, or in addition, from the reisha, you can see a support to Rabbi Ami and his explanation of Rabbi Eliezer. Tikotoni, and this is a quote from Rabbi Eliezer himself speaking, not like we saw before, trying to figure out Rabbi Ozer through the eyes of Rabbi Akiva, but this is a quote from Rabbi Ozer himself. And what did it say? Tikotoni mishabasa lirishuso nikmarolo. Regarding the Yavama, it says, and when she comes into his domain, so certainly nigmarolo, certainly he has the power to do hafara. V'i delo kaddish. If the Yavam had not given her money, my nigmarolo. What does that expression mean? she's now complete with him. Tifsho mine, from this terminology, nigmar lo kisha'asa ba maimer. It's a reference to the Yavam having done maimer with her. As you can see at this point then, we've come to the end of the long point, which had Rav Ami seeing support from the Tanaic source that the Tana, Rebbe Lezer, in speaking about Hafora powers of a Yavam, even when there are two Yivmin, is when one of the Yivmin had done Maimer. At this point, the Gemara wants to explain another, let's say, vague phrase found in the Brisa, at the end of the Brisa on Ayin Dal Amid Beis, and you have another cross-reference marking. You can see on the left-hand side of our Gemara an arrow indicating to look at Ayin Dalet Amid Beis. You'll discover a corresponding arrow 2 lines from the bottom, back there on Ayin Dalet Amid Beis, indicating to look to Ayin Hey Amid Aleph, where this quote comes from. So the Gemara asks, "My ukshar dvorim kein nedarim dekotani." This was Rabbi Akiva's summation, whereby he said, just like in other areas, so too in the case of nedarim. Omar Rava hachi kotani. This is the understanding of Rabbi Akiva's point. Iyata moide she'ein chayovim skila kinam rasa. Do you not agree that in the case of immorality on the part of a shomeres yavam, a woman waiting to do yibum, that there is no death penalty, there's no stoning? Even if maimer was done, there's no stoning, as would have been the case of a nara hamurasa, an outsider woman who met a man who offered her marriage. In the case of a nara hamurasa, one who conducts immorality with her would get stoned. Omar Rav Ashi Masnisen Nami Daika. From our Mishnah Daf Ayin Daled Omid Aleph, you can see a support to this understanding of the Brisa, that proof is brought. Rabbi Akiva is bringing proof from the fact that there's a chiyuv skila in a regular marriage, which you don't find in the case of yibum. What did it say in the Mishnah on Ayin Daled Omid Aleph? Ein yavama gemura leisha kashem sharusa gemura leisha. A yavama is not a complete bond, as is the case of an arusa with her husband. Now, from the fact that we're referring to the man-woman relationship using the word isha, it must be that we're talking about a case of maimer. That point you can see in the Rashi, Dikotani ein hayavama gemura liisha mitakakari liyavama isha, from the fact that the loshen isha was used. Isha means ish shelah, her husband, and it said ein yavama gemura leisha. That word, from the fact that she is being referred to as the isha of her ish, alma kshosava maimer askinan. We're talking about a case of maimer. Maimer was done. Umidika omar hacha, and from the fact that it says here, the ikonami lahakish la'arusa, that we're comparing or contrasting the yavama after maimer to the case of arusa, shma minod mishum skila hu dekam Rabbi Akiva. It's because of skila, which is not present in the case of the yavama, even if maimer was done. The eino mefer kishem shemefer arusa, as opposed to the arusa case, a regular marriage where hafara is a possibility. Not so in the case of yibum. And that the point of contrast, though it's not so explicit in the Mishnah, but the fact that the yavama is being contrasted with the case of the arusa, and in the case of arusa we know there's a penalty of skila, it must be that in contrast with her, the Yavama, there is no penalty of skila, and therefore there is no hafora power on the part of the Yavam either. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.